So, welcome to I've Been Hacked, Now What? So, he mentioned a little bit about me. So, I am the editor-in-chief of PHP Architect magazine. If you're interested, I have a few copies up here. Unfortunately, these are my last copies, so they're my personal copies, so please don't take them, but please come up and take a look at them. I can get you a discount code if you would like. Also, if you've ever thought about writing for a technical journal, we would love to help you get published. We have technical editors and copy editors that will help your article sound good, so don't worry if you're not a professional writer. We'll help you with that. So please come and talk to me if you've ever been interested in being published. We pay you to write, so it's even. You can make some money doing it. Not much, but a little bit. So come and talk to me about that as well. As Ben mentioned, I'm a user group leader. If you are not a member of a user group, here's my user group pitch. You should find a user group and join. They are amazing. If there's not a user group near you, you should start one. And there are a lot of us who would love to help you do that. There's a lot of support out there for people who want to start a user group, so let us know. We'd love to help you get that started. If you are not interested in starting one and there's not one near you, but you want to be part of one, check out Nomad PHP. It's Nomad PHP. It's an online user group, so all you need is an internet connection and you have a user group near you. So check that out as well. So taking a look at websites. Here's a website that I was called in to take a look at. It seems fine, right? They have their pictures, they've got their content, everything's fine. However, this is what Google was getting when they went to the site. Yeah, this is not the content they wanted to be advertising on Google. So they're like, what happened? Because they go to the website, it looks fine. Well, what's happening is there's a little bit of code being injected. It's only being injected if it's a robots file coming through, or if it's a spider coming through. It's not if it's being displayed to a browser. It's only being inserted at that point. So as a human coming to look at it, you never see it. So what they were getting is Google was getting this, and everyone else was getting the regular content. So they called me in, and they said, what's going on? They also went through the database. It's not in the database. It's not in the admin panel. They can't see it. They can't find it. So where exactly is it coming from? Well, first step, before you go looking for it, stop for a moment and change all the passwords. It doesn't matter where it's coming from at this point. Let's change the passwords to stop any future damage. So you want to make sure not only do you change the passwords for all the users who have access to the server and to the admin panels, but change any SSH keys at this point. You want to make sure there aren't any SSH keys in there that you don't think should be there, so check for any strange SSH keys in there. If you're on a Linux server, a lot of the commands I'm using are for Linux, but there are also comparable commands for Windows servers, but check the bash history, see who's been getting in, what they've been doing. Check the user logins history, and contact the hosting company. If you are not the hosting company, please contact the hosting company and let them know. Chances are if they're on a shared hosting company, it's not their fault they got hacked, it's somebody else on the shared hosting, and if that doesn't get cleaned up, then your site will never be clean. There's a couple of commands you can use at this point. You can use last to discover who's been logging in. There is also history, which will give you a history of the recently used commands, even ones that were used outside of your session. If you just scroll back in the history, you're just getting your commands, but if you use history, you can get commands outside of your session as well. However, a lot of times the hack occurs months and months before anything noticeable happens on the site. So recent history may not give you the information that you need. Okay, so now let's start taking a look. We've sort of locked things down as much as we can. Let's take a look at where this information is coming from. Take a look at the server and see if you can find some strange-looking files. A lot of times there's sort of innocuous names like functions or inc.php. However, sometimes you get strange ones like cookies with a varying number of O's in it. I'm not sure why they think that one's subtle. It's not, but that's a very popular one. Check for any files using func or functions or any sort of variation on that word as well. A lot of times, too, you'll find your normal files, but they will have something injected into them. So take a look through even files that you know are yours and see if they have some strange code at the top. A lot of times, it's going to be obfuscated code, so it's going to be you'll see an eval and gvinflate and the base 64 decode over and over and over and over again. And if you try to go through and clean it up, They've obfuscated it so many times, thousands of times, that it's really a pain to try to get down and see what it actually is. I have a screenshot later. I'll show you what some of this code actually does. But take a look at the files. It's oftentimes at the top or the bottom of the file, which can make it quickly to scan, but you don't want to forget the middle of the file because sometimes they're sneakier and sometimes they're not. Oftentimes it's on one line, and they try to do that, so if you're scanning through the code quickly, you miss the one line. So double check and take a look through. Another one, you may see something kind of like this. So they've caught on to the fact that people often search for eval. So they go through and they do a bunch of string replaces and stuff to trick you into thinking it's real code. So again, though, there's sort of that block of what looks like gibberish but is obfuscated code. So that can be a really big clue as well. This is another one. And these are all samples that I've taken out of files that I've cleaned up. So these are, they're partial, but these are actual hacks that you'll find. So this is another one you might see. Again, if you're searching for the base64 decode or the eval, you're not going to find this one. This one uses URL decode, which is oftentimes a common command in files, especially if you're using a larger framework or application. This is the most common one I've found, is just the simple eval and then miles and miles and miles of text. This is another fun one I enjoyed. So this one, before the obfuscated code, they put a big warning. This file is protected by copyright law. To reverse engineer or decode this file is strictly prohibited. Yeah, good luck enforcing that one, right? So if you see that, that's probably a clue that maybe you should check out what that code is doing. So take a look at that. But they do that because a lot of users will be like, oh, you can't touch that. And it's like, I really should. So files that are commonly injected. You're going to want to take a look first at the htaccess file, especially when it's something like a Google injection where only Google is seeing it. Check the htaccess files. That's very commonly where it's put in. If you're using something that uses themes or plugins or modules or templates of some kind, some sort of any external libraries, check in there, see if they're coming in through there. Check any upload directories, especially upload directories that might be world writable, especially WordPress. I'm going to mention WordPress several times because I've cleaned that up so many times. So double check the WordPress uploads file. There should never be any PHP files in the uploads directory of WordPress for most use cases. So double check if there's any executable code in the uploads directory. Double check your config files. Sometimes they'll hide it in the config files because config files oftentimes are very long, and most people don't take the time to read through what everything in the config file means. So, a less tech-savvy developer or a less tech-savvy user going through a huge config file oftentimes will miss the things that they've injected. So double check your config files. So if they've injected something into your htaccess file, it could look like this. So this is utilizing mod rewrite, and what it's doing is it's deciding whether or not you're a search engine or if you're a person viewing through a browser. And based on that, it routes you to either the normal file or to this file that they've called common.php. And common.php is going to do that Google injection to get all of their keywords into your Google search results. So this is something that you might find in an htaccess file. So we've kind of taken a look through, but manually looking through things can be very, very time intensive. And if you have a site with thousands of files, it might be overwhelming to try to look through all of them by hand. So we can do some searching to try to find out what's been changed. Now, the trick with finding out what's been changed is that it's oftentimes pretty easy to mask what's been changed when they come in, but not completely. So most often, people will come in and they'll do an ls, and you can add the -la to get some more information. So you can see here I have a file edited March 19th, 2012. Now, if I go through and make a change to that, so I've touched it, so now it's going to say March 28th, 2013, or whatever the date is. So you go through, and you should now be able to search for that date and see all the new files that have changed. However, if I go through and touch that, and I add the -t, I can now specify a date that I want listed for when that file was changed. And now you can see my file hasn't been changed since October 2011, so clearly that's not a file you need to worry about looking at, right? So not so much. So what you want to do is there's a couple different ways you can check for a more secure date than just using ls, just using list. So there's a program called stat. It's not always available, especially if you're on shared hosting. Some shared hosting allows you access to it, some will not. But if you are running your own server, you should have access to it. So stat will give you information. It will give you the 3 dates that the server stores, the access, modify, and change. So the C time, or the change, is what you really want to pay attention to there. If you don't have access to stat, you can use ls-cl and get the change information, and that's going to give us the change date. What you can also do once you have identified sort of a date range or a specific date when these malicious files were introduced or when your good files were changed, you can now go through and search the server for other files that were modified or changed in that same general time. A lot of times they log in, they'll upload all of the files, and then they don't access your server again for a couple of months, hoping that you don't notice the new information that's been introduced, and that you'll continue using it so that all of your backups are now infected as well. So having that date range identified can be helpful, but don't think that if you get rid of everything on that date that you're now safe, because a lot of times they'll upload multiple times, hoping that you'll clean off one date and not another. So you can use a find. You can search within a specific directory or not, and you can add a flag with -ctime, and -ctime will search the change time as opposed to the access or modify time, which you're able to change. So let's take a look at what this bad code actually does. So sometimes it just introduces that Google code like we talked about, or whichever search engine you're using, so the search engine injection code. Sometimes that's all it does. Other times it does things that are a lot more fun. And a friend of mine went through some of that obfuscated code, and it took a long time to get through all the layers of encryption, but we got through, and this is what we found. And I apologize, it's a little bit blurry. But what this is this is a GUI admin panel that they have installed on the server. It gives them access to FTP files up. It gives them access to create users. It gives them access to use the server. I don't know if you can tell, but over on the side there is a menu item called brute force. It allows them to run brute force attacks via your server to other servers, or if you're on shared hosting, oftentimes they'll have an item where they can now use your area of the server to try to spread out and attack other areas of the server. It will automatically try to restore keys when you delete them, SSH keys. There's a lot of different things that it'll try to do. It introduces a lot of backdoors for them to get in. So it's really important to make sure you've cleaned everything out, because that one line of code produces this admin panel. So if that one line of code is in 27 files, they have 27 admin panels that they're hoping you'll miss one, because they only need you to miss one, and they're back in. So once we've sort of identified which files were changed, and we found the bad files, now we might have access to which user modified those files. So if you find out which user's been compromised, or if you find out that they've created a user that you weren't expecting, we can now go through and take the file and grep the logs and find out who modified those files. So let's say we take our cookies file that we know is bad. We're going to look through the access logs, and we're going to find out which IP address they came in at, which obviously is not going to be their IP address, but we now have an IP address to check in the logs because everything they did that day is probably coming in on that same IP address, so at least you have some place to start looking. Don't think that you've found the hacker if you get that IP address, because I guarantee you it's not theirs. So then once we have that IP address, we can grep the logs again for that IP address and see if they came in multiple times under that IP address, or we can see if we need to flag that IP address to prevent access again. You can grep for the keywords that we found in the code, like eval, the base64 decode, and things like that. Oftentimes, depending on what you're running, that might be a very, very common phrase that's being used correctly, or it might be out of the ordinary. It's much easier to find these if it's not something that you're already using, because otherwise you get thousands of results back, and most of them are good. What you can do then if you have a lot of eval and base64 decode statements that are validly in your code, what you can do is take a bit of the encrypted string or the encoded string and then grep for that, because that's not going to match what your code does with the encoded, or what your encoded code looks like. So you can use a bit of the encoded code to grep instead of the command itself. If you're specifically using WordPress, again, I apologize for harping on WordPress, but I've cleaned it up so many times. There is some automated scanning help specifically for WordPress. So there's an exploit scanner in WordPress. There's also WP Scan, and I have the links here. And I do have my slides posted. I'll give you the link as well, so if you'd like to get the URLs later. So these can help you scan WordPress, find out if you have any holes, find out if you're missing anything, and so on. So once we've sort of identified what was changed, we want to make sure that we get everything cleaned up. If you know you have a clean backup, you can restore from that clean backup. If your backup is stored on the server that was hacked, you do not have a clean backup. If your backup comes from the server and you aren't absolutely positive that you know when the exploit happened or when the intrusion happened, then you don't have a clean backup. The best way to know you have a clean backup is to have a backup on a separate server, and nothing comes down from the production server, it only goes up from the backup server, so that nothing that happens on the live server gets brought back into the backup. That's the only way to sort of make sure it's clean. If you don't have a clean backup, you're going to have to manually clean up all the changed files. In the case of something like WordPress or other software applications, you can do a fresh install with the latest version and then migrate your data in there after you're sure it's cleaned. And once you have everything cleaned up, make sure you install all current security patches. Make sure everything is up to date. So when cleaning up WordPress, overwrite any of the core files. Those core files, you should get new copies. Even if you think you have a clean backup, it's safest to overwrite those with a clean copy just in case, with a new one. If you have any themes you're not using, uninstall them. And that goes for everything, not just WordPress. If you have themes, plugins, modules, libraries that you are not using, get rid of them. Lock it down so that only what you're using is what you have. Because the more third-party stuff you have in there, the more vulnerabilities you could be introducing. So if you're not using something, get rid of it. With WordPress, you want to make sure you delete the plugins directory and install everything from scratch. Kind of obnoxious, but it's too hard to go through all of the plugins directories and make sure everything is clean. It's best just to get new copies. WordPress has specific hardening instructions, and WordPress is not the only application that has hardening instructions, so check the software manual for whatever you're using and see if they have specific instructions for how to lock things down. Again, check your uploads directory again, because we want to make sure nothing's been introduced in the time that we were cleaning things. And if you can, make sure you're removing any install directories, and if you can, lock down the uploads directory. That would be great. If you have a few users who need to upload things to the upload directory, lock it down to their specific IP addresses. It's best if you don't have to leave it world readable. Once you're sure everything is clean, go through and change all the passwords again. As I said, we don't know that things stayed clean while we were going through the cleaning process, so change all the passwords again. You want to make sure that you are not using passwords that are words. Leet speak is easy to crack. The first letters of Bible verses apparently is a common password. Don't use that. They have those all cataloged as well. And also popular songs, also like the lyrics from popular songs are also categorized. It's best if you can use a password that's at least 15 characters long. I know that's really hard to convince your users of, but if you can, that would be nice. And then regenerate and reissue any SSH key pairs, because again, we don't know that those were not compromised during this cleaning process. Once you're sure everything is clean, it's nice to set up some monitoring so you can keep an eye out for this happening again. If you've been hacked once, chances are they're going to try again. So we want to make sure, especially if you're on shared hosting, because you may have cleaned and locked down your stuff, but not everyone on the shared hosting probably has, or you may not have access to lock down the shared hostings problem. So having some monitoring can really help watch for these things to happen in the future. There are a lot of automated tools out there you can use. One of them is Vega. They will automatically crawl and scan for vulnerabilities, which is very fun. There are WordPress plugins, which can help you with scanning. You can also do something simple like set up a cron job for some of the keywords that you found while you were cleaning things up. and just set up something to email you if it notices any of these keywords popping up in the code. Okay, so now take a moment and relax, and now let's take a look at why this happened. So some of the common entry points about why this happened are, number one, shared hosting. If you were on shared hosting, that's probably how they got in. Shared hosting is notorious for not keeping software up to date, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your software. A very, very common attack vector is actually PHP-MyAdmin. PHP-MyAdmin does not get updated for years and years on shared hosting. Tons of security holes are left open, and even if your site is not using a database and has no access to the database, they can still get into your area of the server because the shared hosting allows PHP-MyAdmin access to your area of the server. So double check with your shared hosting. Make sure you've told them, let them know what you found out when you're cleaning things up, let them know which hack you found, and so on. Try to ask them, hey, when's the last time you updated all the software? It's not a question they like answering, but it's an important one to ask. Again, get rid of anything you're not using. Any applications that are not locked down, if you're not using the application, get rid of it. If you are, make sure that you don't have world-readable config files, world-readable install directories. Get rid of the install directories if you can. If you can't, make sure they can't run. We want to make sure that people can't access these types of files. Never, ever, ever let anyone on your server do this. So I can't tell you how many times I have seen this backup method. It's not a good backup method. What you've just done is you've taken your PHP file and turned it into a text file, which now easily displays in any browser and shows all of the code and all of the passwords and whatever else you have in there. Never, ever do this. Implement some sort of backup strategy. If you have to back up like this, don't leave those files on the server. Pull them off someplace that is locked down very well. Or encourage your clients to implement some sort of backup regimen that backs up off the server or uses, say, like version control or something like that as a backup strategy as opposed to using this. Double check all the code you have on the server. Any code that's custom, code that you can easily look through. If you're wondering what to check for in your code, the next talk after lunch is going to be Eli White. So I was kind of glad that my talk got moved before him because otherwise this slide would have said, I hope you went to Eli's talk. So you can go to Eli's talk, Web Security and You. He's going to talk about how to lock down your code, what kinds of attacks to watch for in your code, and things like that. So that's at 2 o'clock in the Codebase and Deploy track. Once you've checked through all your code, have someone else check it. If you have multiple developers on your team, it's good to have someone else review your code. When we work with our code, we know it so well, we oftentimes miss things, and having a fresh set of eyes come in and look at the code, or even someone who just looks at things differently, can really be beneficial. If you don't have someone internally who can do a code review, or if you are all too entrenched in the same code, it's really nice to have someone who doesn't work with the code look at it. So if everyone on your team is too entrenched in the code, there are security firms out there who will do a security audit of your code for you. It's not cheap, but it's much cheaper than getting hacked. So take a look at those kinds of things. Be aware of the security vulnerabilities that are out there. One great resource is the OWASP Top 10 project. Every year they come out and with the top 10 vulnerabilities of the year. So take a look. You can go back multiple years. If you do go back multiple years, you'll notice a pattern. A lot of the lists are very similar, and that's because no matter how many times we talk about it, these problems are not getting patched or fixed. So take a look. Be aware of the top 10 security vulnerabilities. They have a lot of great resources, links to articles about how to fix these things, so it can be really helpful. Yeah, CSI PHP, not specifically a security website, but talking about bad code. So the whole point of the website is investigating terrible code that they've found. But what comes out through that is some great information about why shouldn't you do it this way, what's a better way to do it, and cleaning up bad code generally makes it more secure as well. So take a look. CSI PHP is a very fun website to go through and see these horrific code and then never mention to someone else that your code looks just like that while you go quietly fix it. So phpdeveloper.org is sort of a news aggregator for PHP news, if you're not familiar with it. And they tag their articles, and they have a security tag. So if you go to phpdeveloper.org/tag/security, you'll get their security articles. There's feeds you can sign up for to be automatically notified. It's a great way to sort of keep up on what security news is coming out, what new hacks people are discovering, what new ways there are to lock things down. I apologize, this slide is very small, but it's meant for when you download my slides later. But there are a lot of articles here about how to harden specific things. There's a spider simulator. I recommend if you have been a victim of one of those search engine injection attacks, you can run this spider simulator, set up a cron job to run it or check it, watch for those keywords in the spidered results, and keep an eye out for that happening again. Also, if you've been a victim and Google knows you were hacked and they've now marked you as a malicious site, you'll have to sign up for their webmaster tools and request that your site be recrawled or reevaluated. It takes a long time to be reevaluated, so the sooner you can get that request in, the better. But make sure that your site is absolutely cleaned up before you request that crawl. Sometimes they do it instantly. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 weeks before they get to it, and you never know. So if you request it when you're almost done cleaning and they scan it right away, next time it will be 4 weeks before they check it. So you want to make sure you don't miss that window of opportunity with getting recrawled and requalified as a non-malicious site. So there's also some exploit scanners, as I said. There's the WordPress key generator. If you are using WordPress and you've been hacked, regenerate the WordPress keys as well as your SSH keys, and so on. So a lot of good resources here. At this point, I'd like to pause for a second and ask if anyone has any questions. Oh, I'm supposed to ask you to wait for the mic.
Hi, it's specific to Linux, but have you ever had success with RK Hunter in finding the things that were installed on your site?
Did you say RK Hunter?
Yeah.
I'm actually not familiar with RK Hunter.
You're not?
So I have not used it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Is anyone else familiar with RK Hunter? Comment on that?
Yeah, it's a rootkit detection certificate.
Oh, rootkit. Okay. Sorry. I thought you were saying like arcane, like very old arcane hunter, and I'm like, no.
It's the accent, isn't it?
It's okay. Yeah. I'm also very nervous up here, so people speak slowly with me. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, it's more of a comment than a question, but you mentioned PHP files in the upload folder.
Yes.
They should probably, one of the first things you should do if you think you've been hacked is go in your htaccess and make sure PHP isn't running in any upload folders. So you can't actually execute PHP outside of the folders that it should be in.
Right. That's an excellent point. So yeah, make sure, and not just PHP. If you have something in the uploads directory, you shouldn't be allowing anything to run in there. So PHP is obviously a very specific one if you're dealing with WordPress and so on, but upload directories, nothing should really run in there.
Yeah, just another little tip that I've found quite useful quite a lot. When you're grepping through the log files for these evals and things, if you don't find anything, sometimes I've found that looking for the timestamp or looking at the log entries of the timestamp of the files created can sometimes lead to it. Not always, but sometimes. Definitely,
definitely. And when you're grepping for the time, grep for the C time, because that's the one they can't change. Well, they can't change without rebooting the server, so they probably haven't changed it.
Questions? Is anyone in the other room? Okay. Any more questions? Specific question. With attacks, are you finding they're automated attacks or people actually going in and attacking?
Automated attacks, is that what you said?
Are they mostly automated attacks or are they people going in?
Sure. I would say, from my personal experience, I don't have any specific statistics, but from my personal experience, what I've seen is probably about 80% of the time it's automated. They're just using your server to send out spam messages. They're using you as a mail relay, or they're using you as a brute force vector for someone else. But about 20% of the time, we've found those admin panels and seen access times for those admin panels and things like that. So in those cases, I think it was an actual person. But generally, I think most of the time it's automated. It's just too time intensive to attack little sites and then do it all by hand. So.
Hi. I've got various applications, and it logs a lot of requests to a variety of URLs trying to get into PHP-MyAdmin. And I was just wondering if there's anything you can do to sort of block repeated failed attempts to load pages that are obviously hacking attempts.
It depends how much access you have to your server.
Full access.
Yes, yeah. So if you're on shared hosting, you could ask them nicely to do it, but whether or not they will is, is a question. But if you have access to your own server, you can block requests to those types of pages, or what you can do is if someone requests a certain type of page that you know you don't have, you can collect a lot more information on them, send out notices and things like that. So there are ways you can do it through like HT access or through server rules and things like that you can block those. Yeah, you can also have it sort of grab the IP, and if they're requesting a file they shouldn't be accessing, automatically block that IP right away.
Well, I thought about that, but then IP addresses get reused, so you might end up blocking real visitors.
Yes, yeah. Although a real visitor will contact you and say, I can't get to your site.
Sure.
So it depends how much you're getting attacked. Sometimes it's nice to have it automatically block right away and then notify you so that you can go back in and say, a day later, we'll release that IP address. And that way you're blocking the 3,000 requests that are about to come in the next hour.
Sure.
But 24 hours later, depending on the hacker, they've probably moved on to a new block of IP addresses because they know that the ones they used yesterday are not going to work anymore. And so sometimes even just blocking it for a day or a week or something allows for the reuse for real users, but blocks at least that initial attack vector to protect your server from being overwhelmed.
Thanks.
Did you have a question over here? No? Okay.
Yeah, you do? Okay, hang on a sec.
Hi. Just going back onto the IP blocking, there's quite a popular service called Cloudflare, which I believe...
Called what?
Cloudflare.
Cloudflare?
Yeah, so
okay.
it's cloudflare.com. They do a free tier and, whatever,
Okay.
freemium. But one of the things that they do is they use the OWASP project, which I believe maintains a list of known IP addresses worldwide.
Oh, okay.
And they use that as an upstream list into Cloudflare's system.
Okay.
And you set your name servers to Cloudflare, and all your traffic goes through Cloudflare first, and then it's reverse proxy to your server.
Okay.
Because they maintain that active list of IPs, it actually filters a lot of requests before they get to your server in the first place. So I find that helps if you've got a site that's being heavily accessed by bots.
Do you ever notice any performance decline because of that redirect?
Yeah, specifically when Cloudflare goes down.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it did happen in the past. They do a lot of rerouting now across data centers, so you do get a bit of latency if your traffic goes over to the US and back again.
Sure.
It does seem a lot more reliable recently.
Okay.
I think it is a personal decision whether you use it or not.
I think it depends to what your risk level is. If you are being hacked a lot, then the performance decline is probably worth it.
Yeah.
If you've never been hacked, and you probably won't be, maybe the performance hit isn't going to be worth it. But yeah, that's interesting.
Personally, I use IP tables rate limiting.
Can we just check the second room? Are there any questions in the second room?
Oh, there's a second room?
There is a whole second room.
Hello, second room.
Hello. I was wondering if you ever see people running, say, WordPress on a very locked down site. So you edit your WordPress and then push static HTML to your kind of production server. So does that make sense? So
Sure.
what people see is just static HTML on a server with no PHP or anything else.
And then the WordPress is locked down in the background, is that what you're saying? I have not seen people do that specifically with WordPress, but there are different generators out there where you can run a dynamic site in the background and they'll generate HTML for you. I've seen quite a few sites using like Sculpin and things like that. The problem with that is even if you're only sending the generated HTML to the server, if your WordPress site gets hacked, it's going into the HTML and still going out, especially if they're doing, say, the search engine injection. That's going to come through in your static HTML. So it depends how much you can lock down WordPress. If you can make it non-web accessible, that might be handy, but yeah.
Hi, so this is actually an answer to a previous question where we were talking about rate limiting and that sort of stuff. On Linux, there's this really, really good program called Fail to Ban, and it can analyze log files, and you can basically configure it to look for specific things. So with a lot of these automated attacks, when you see how many requests coming from a specific IP, Fail to Ban will then ban that IP for 20 minutes or so, and that should be long enough for the automated bot to then move on, and then it will unban the IPs again. So it's a really good way to stop those kind of attacks.
Good, thanks for sharing. Did that answer the question in the other room? I just realized we should check first. Did that?
Yep.
Yes, okay, good.
We have another question from the other
Okay, wonderful. Another disembodied voice from the sky.
Hi. Have you ever had any personal experience working with mod evasive and mod security on the Apache level? And whether you've seen any performance degradation, and how far would you go with those kind of measures when securing a site?
Can you repeat the last part of the question? It got a little quiet.
How far would you go with securing a site using mod evasive and mod security given the performance implications?
Gotcha, given the performance implications. So with those kinds of things, again, you need to take a look at what are your users willing to put up with on the front end as far as performance hits. Some websites are more tolerant to performance slowdowns than others. You need to take a look at your risk. If your website is hacked, do you have 3 people who might see something that they shouldn't for a little while, or do you have 1 million people who are losing their financial data? So you need to take a look at what your risk is, and I think it needs to sort of be a case-by-case decision as to whether or not the performance hit is worth locking it down. Some places are very tolerant of, you know, okay, so my blog got hacked, I have some, you know, Google gets some bad information about me, but 3 people read my blog a year, so who cares? Whereas, you know, I would hope my bank is much less tolerant of, you know, hacks and things like that. So I think that if you're dealing with secure information, personally identifying information about your users, financial information, medical information, those kinds of things, then I think it's definitely worth the performance hit to lock things down as much as you can. However, not all industries are tolerant of that, so you need to sort of evaluate the risk versus the benefits. Does that answer that question? Can you see?
Have you had any experience working with mod evasive and mod security to lock down machines to prevent these kind of attacks?
I've worked with mod security, but not mod evasive.
Okay, what was your experience? Did you find that it blocks the majority of attacks that you just described, the vectors that you just listed?
So far, so good. Yeah, I found that generally sort of like the injection hacks for search engines and the WordPress hacks and things like that, it definitely cut down on that. As I said, so far so good. I can't guarantee it's going to work forever, but so far so good on using mod security. But it's one of those things, again, it's only good enough until somebody figures out how to get around it. So you can't claim to be secure, but it definitely has helped. So if you can convince the users to go with it, give it a try.
More questions?
Hello, again. It's just a WordPress specific one. The Word Fence plugin. Have you come across that one?
I'm sorry, the what?
Word Fence.
Word fence?
Word Fence, yeah.
Oh, fence. Okay.
Yeah, it's a relatively new one. But that uses, I think it's the Fidget network, but it pulls all the WordPress installations that have the Word Fence plugin installed. And it uses them to help maintain lists of incoming IP addresses that are trying to take advantage of attack vectors. And it helps communicate across Fidget's network, so it's kind of like a cloud-based, similar to Cloudflare,
okay.
But you actually host it on your instance. It's free to use. And you can configure, there was a question earlier about automated 404 blocking after a certain number of requests. You can set, you know, whether it's 5 requests, and then you can choose to block them out for 5 minutes, or personally I choose to block them out for 2 months. And that really helps bring down a lot of traffic. It's also got a really good feature, which is live traffic feed. And you can either look at every incoming request, or you can filter out bots and just look at humans, or just look at bots.
Okay.
And it's also got a feature for blocking fake Google crawlers, which
nice.
is really handy.
That's very helpful. Excellent. One quick question on that. So then, does it also look at, okay, so these sites on our network were hacked, and these are the files that were injected. Do they take a look at that at all, watching for those files?
It has got a file scanner, which is optional. Okay. The way that it works is it self-schedules, but the schedule is done by the cloud on the free tier, or you can do a schedule manually if you pay for it. But it does scan for common vulnerabilities, and the database is held at FEJIT. So as vulnerabilities are found, it's put onto the database, and then the next scan that's scheduled in, it will search your files. So it searches your themes, your plugins, the core files. One excellent feature is that for all plugins, it compares the source code on disk against the latest SVN repository version, or the version that you have on disk. And if there's any change, it will actually bring up, send you an email, show you a diff.
Oh, nice.
And also for core files, and it pings you for when a WordPress version is released. It compares the latest version against yours. If it's out of date, it tells you. So to be honest, it's been the best security plugin I've found for WordPress so far.
Is it a free plugin?
It is a free plugin. It's another freemium plugin, so you've got more features if you pay a certain amount.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. This is why I love this discussion time, because I find out, oh, next time I'm going to use that.
That's really cool. Any questions in here? No? No, so it's questions in this room anymore? Any further? And that last thing was called Cloud Fence.
That's Word Fence.
Word Fence. Word Fence. Okay.
Sounds great.
Just search for WordPress security on the plugin.new. It's on the top of 5 stars.
Okay, wonderful.
Wonderful. Okay. I have a couple more slides, so
please.
I'll just finish up my slides, and then we can do more questions if you'd like. I just want to make sure I get through all the slides. I don't have that many left, but. So my last plug for my magazine. I'm incredibly biased, but it's the best PHP magazine ever. So stop by, take a look at the copies. This is a coupon code if you'd like to use it, 25% off a new subscription. And I will say that that includes the print copy. We are printing in journal style, so it's a very, very nice printed copy. It's a little expensive here in the UK, I apologize. We ship it out of the US, but we are investigating a shipping and printing facility in Europe, and we're hoping to get that up and running as soon as we can. No promises on when that will happen, but we're working on that so then we could ship from here, which will make it significantly cheaper for you guys. But for now, take a look at the issue here. So you can find me on Twitter, E3BethT. If you come across a new security plugin or tool, I would love to hear about it. I clean up hacked websites all the time, and I'm always looking for new tools to use. Here's my slides link, so treelinedesign.com/slides. And I did upload the slides right before the talk started, so they are currently there if you'd like to download them. I will also add the slides link to Joined In. Small plug for where I teach. We have a security course. So if you like Eli's talk, we have a much more in-depth course on PHP security as well. And please give me feedback on Joined In. Here's my Joined In link. Otherwise, if you go to Joined In, PHP UK, last time I checked this morning, was at the top, and you can find my talk in there. As speakers, we really, really value the feedback. We give these talks multiple times, and any improvements you have suggestions for, we would love to make them. If you're not comfortable giving the feedback on Joined In, here's my email address, beth@musketeers.me. Also, if you come across a cool hack that you find, I'd love to see it. I collect hacked files. If you'd like to see any of the hacked files, I have copies. So drop me an email, and I'll find a way to sort of send them to you without sending them to you. So, yeah, so feel free to pass the information along. All right, thank you very much, and I'll be around the rest of the day if you have questions.